pre-Islamic inscriptions, epigraphic evidence, all of this stuff. We're all about wanting to know the best we can.
Like sort of theoretical discussions of the same material over and over again.
A lot of people don't realize that a lot of these texts come later, describing events that supposedly happened centuries earlier.
When it comes to this field, we have a lot of questions that we can't answer. My field of interest is pre-Islamic Arabia. A lot of this material is not recollective.
Welcome back to MythVision Podcast. I'm your host, Derek Lambert. Today, I have Professor Ahmad Al-Jallad, and that'll probably be the last time I use your first name. Just to be safe, I need to perfect how to pronounce your first name there. But Dr. Al-Jallad, thank you for joining us here at MythVision. You have been on my radar for quite some time with scholarly research, pre-Islamic inscriptions, epigraphic evidence, all of this stuff. We're all about wanting to know the best we can. Like, what's really going on? What can we learn about history and how can we understand these civilizations? So you're just the guy for the job. Welcome to MythVision for your first time.
Good to be here. Yes, we've been corresponding for some time now, maybe a year, trying to figure out an appropriate time to do this, and I'm glad it's worked out now.
I am as well. I am, of course, always a student. I may learn some things and make some guesses and take a position over time in all my research. But what I like to do most of all is try to learn and hear what professors have to teach. And then I can make my own mind up about research as I go along. So what did you bring for us today?
Well, so when we were talking about what to discuss, I think we had first in mind sort of the conventional interview. What do you do? What are you interested in?
Right.
And, I've given that interview already a million times online on YouTube. It's just kind of, it's a waste of time to do again. So what I thought, and, this is what we were discussing before this meeting, is to talk about methods in pushing the field forward and the kind of research that's necessary really to go beyond sort of theoretical discussions of the same material over and over again that kind of go in circles and we really can't come to a resolution. And this has a lot to do with subjects that you're interested in, namely pre-Islamic Arabia, early Islam, Islamic origins, and things of this sort. And so this is timely because I've just returned from a season of field work this year in Jordan. Previously, I was in Saudi Arabia, but this year in Jordan. And so we'll talk a little bit about the importance of field work in generating new data. See, we are right now in, we can say, the age of exploration when it comes to this field. We have a lot of questions that we can't answer because we don't have the evidence. But it's very likely that the evidence is out there somewhere, and we need to find it. It's a period of exploration. I am fortunate enough to be involved in that process of exploration. It's a tremendous privilege, exciting, it's exhilarating. And so we'll talk a little bit about some of the fun stuff we discovered this year, some of the stuff that we discovered in previous years, and how the need for that type of field work, in order to answer some of the questions we were interested in.
So I guess to help our audience kind of track along here with what we're going to be discussing or what you're going to be presenting today and giving us a walkthrough is we have ideas that are written in a lot of traditional writings, whether it be Christianity, Judaism, or Islam and their origins about how things were exactly. And a lot of people don't realize that a lot of these texts come later, describing events that supposedly happened centuries earlier. And a lot of scholars sometimes take extremes where they don't think there's anything to the tradition. And then you have the other side that says the tradition is everything is there and it tells you exactly. You don't need to go and pull up the rocks and look at the epigraphy or anything like that. And we're trying to be truth honest seekers and say, hey, if this says 1 + 1 = 2, then we're going to go with where 1 and plus. We're jabbing at Terrence here together on the show. But I'm just joking. But
yes, 1 + 1 = 2 still agreed upon, or
I hope he agrees to that one.
That's
right.
Yeah.
But you get where I'm going with this. It's like I want the facts. I want the truth here. And if tradition accurately represents something, cool, I'm for it. Just doing that with historical methodology.
Yeah. So my field of primary interest. So I don't consider myself a scholar of Islam or in Islamic studies or anything like this. My field of interest is pre-Islamic Arabia. Okay. So and that's, of course, in terms of written records, that takes us back to the Bronze Age, up until really the rise of Islam. Okay, I would end pre-Islamic Arabia with the establishment of the Medinan state, or maybe the Medinan Caliphate, right? So the first caliphs of Medina. That's where I would see that as sort of the watershed moment that allows us to periodization, separating pre-Islamic Arabia from what comes later. And one of the reasons why I think that periodization is useful is that when we move forward from there, a lot of the material we have about pre-Islamic Arabia that's produced by scholars working in the Islamic period. A lot of this material is not recollective, not compositions of genuine memories of what was happening in pre-Islamic times, but is rather generative. There is an atmosphere, there is a moment in history about 150 years after the establishment of Islam and going forward, where there's a tremendous interest in antiquities and antiquarianism, what happened in ancient times. And because of that interest, you have a process of generation, a generative process that produces stories and legends, probably based off of folklore about things that happened long ago. So that material there, of course, this is not religious material. No one would claim material is inspired by God or whatever. This was the efforts of what we would call today folklorists and antiquarianists and so forth in the Abbasid period, maybe late Umayyad and Abbasid period, trying to give us an image of pre-Islamic Arabia. But their goal was perhaps a bit different than ours. I wouldn't say that they weren't after exactly what happened, but rather this was storytelling in its own right, which was pedagogical, which had, sort of to entertain as well, which explained and contextualized certain things that of their own time. So that's the material we end up with about pre-Islamic Arabia. That's the most popular material. So if you go online and try to read about pre-Islamic Arabia, really that's the kind of material that's going to inform what was going on then.
Just one comment on that, because I read there was a book you sent me to read. We weren't going to cover that specific topic, but for those,
right.
I can't remember the name of the book, but it's particular about these pre-Islamic gods and goddesses. And what I find interesting,
was that my book that I sent you?
It wasn't. I don't think it was your book, but I think you sent me a book that was someone wrote this way back in the past. That's trying to kind of paint the picture.
Oh, yes. Sorry, yes. Okay, yes, I know what you're talking about. That is the famous Kitab al-Asnam, the Book of Idols by Ibn al-Jallad.
Right.
Yes. So that is the classic work on, let's say, the pre-Islamic Arabian religion. All right.
And for me, when I read it, it sounds like, and I'm not trying to be funny, I'm just trying to be straightforward. It sounds like there's kind of a propagandistic way of viewing it through the lens of, we have the accurate one, Muhammad and Allah.
Yeah, of course. I mean, so the way that kind of work begins is, so Ibn al-Kalbi has a model of history. Okay. And then he has bits of folklore, legends, lines of poetry, and all of those disparate pieces of data are going to be interpreted viewed through the lens of this theory of history. Right. And his theory of history is that in the most ancient times, primordial man was a devout monotheist. Okay, worshiping the one God. And then, as time passed, they sort of lapse. They start worshiping other things. They revere humans to such a degree that they become gods, influenced by foreigners. That is for the Arabians. And that is how polytheism comes into being, right? And all of his bits of, let's say, Arabian lore that deal with, different gods being worshipped and rituals, they're configured within this model as, arising from the corruption of primordial monotheism. And then primordial monotheism is restored through the ministry of Muhammad. You see? So we go complete circle. You see? So this is the model of history that he's working with.
That's also a model, by the way, that Jews had of theirs, because they believed at one point before the Tower of Babel, one God, they worship the one true God. Yeah. And then there's the division of the nations, which get each nation gets a God, but the one for Israel was Yahweh. And then, of course, they end up falling away, and then they come back, and you know what I mean? It's interesting.
Yeah, this is, of course, not a model that Ibn al-Kalbi came up with. No, right? So this is find things. There are parallel works in, for example, Syriac that present similar things. So that's fine, right? That's the model, and we have to put the model aside. So that's the basic way of thinking about the arc of history. And then you have these bits of folklore. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
Somebody saying, "Oh yes, I remember. I heard this story, so and so, that they used to worship this idol. This tribe used to worship this idol, and they sang this song to the idol. This guy used to pour milk on this idol." These types of things, these types of bits of stories. Now, Are these stories accurate memories, or are they generated by the fact that if you go to somebody and say, do you have any memories about the Jahiliyyah, the age of ignorance, right? The pre-Islamic age? Do you have any cultural, recollection of that? Do you have any stories? It's very possible, considering that there are a lot of people interested in these subjects, and that very interaction there generates the response. Oh yeah, of course I have a story, and this is how it goes. And some of these things may not even really be that ancient, but just get reassigned. So for example, I was during my fieldwork, one of the things I always do during fieldwork, you take some breaks. So in Jordan, so this is the way the situation goes. You basically plan out the areas we work in the Black Desert, which is a basalt desert in eastern Jordan. Right, this is very rugged landscape, incredibly rugged landscape, very difficult to access. You need to collaborate with locals to figure out your way around these places, completely off-road. And you're talking about moving on basalt, right? So you're in a truck 4x4, and you're very, very tricky stuff. You leave early, you make your plan, you get out to the desert, and then you get to a point where the trucks can't go any further. All right. So you need to go by foot. So a lot of this is hiking, right? You need to hike this stuff. And it's tremendous because, it's so good for you. Every time I do field work, I lose a bunch of weight, and I come back and I gain it all over again. It's this horrible cycle. I really should go to the gym. I haven't been to the gym in years, but you get the idea. So it's wonderful. It's a yearly cycle. So I'm like right about when I can't fit into my clothes anymore, but then field work comes and everything's good again. I don't need to go shopping. And so how does it go? So you get to a point where you can't drive any further, right? And you need to hike. And then you get we have wonderful days, 10-hour days, 12-hour days sometimes. The hiking is beautiful. It's a hill country. So you're going up and down hills on rocks. It's like a Stairmaster, okay? It's really beautiful. Very hot as well. So there's not a lot to motivate the local driver who took you out there to actually go on the hike with you. So what they'll do is they'll set up camp. Put up a little tent, make some tea and coffee, make some, food, and then you go and do your business. At some point, you'll need to come back. You'll need to meet up again so that you can have lunch or get some calories. So let's say you start walking around 5, maybe around noon, you come back and you want to eat. All right, which is quite nice. And, in those moments, I take those moments are very precious because they give me an opportunity to have conversations with the locals.
Right.
And get kind of cultural information. You could ask them about local plants. What is this plant used for? They have all these kind of medicinal purposes they know, and, what this is good for. But they also have a lot of folklore. And so I was asking our driver, who was a local sheikh. He was a Sheikh Ashairi, a tribal sheikh. And he has a great knowledge about genealogies, right? Tribal genealogies. And his main business was conflict resolution, Islah. So when tribes have disputes or tribes members have disputes, he kind of resolves those. So he's a bank of knowledge. He knows all about stuff. And so I asked him, can you tell me some of the traditions of, the elders, former generations? Like, well, in our grandparents' day, when it didn't used to rain, they would take out this wooden effigy, a piece of wood, kind of shaped like a human, and they would dress her up in female clothes. Okay, like a dress and everything. And then they would call her Al-Ghayl. I'll tell you what that means in a bit. Then they would take her to the wadi, and they would run up and down the wadi holding her, singing a song to her. Al-Ghayl ya Ra'de, something I can't remember off the top of my head, the song he'd sang. And then they would give her offerings of dried bread. And this would be for her to bring the rains. All right. Fantastic, right? Fantastic story. Al-Ghayl means something like mother of the ghouls. Right?
Mother of the ghouls?
Of the ghouls. They're kind of jinn, the ghoul. Houl. Yeah. So mother of the ghouls, right? So that is tremendous. So she's some kind of like jinn goddess or something. This is historically, right? So you have these kinds of, so those traditions survive to our day.
And you're talking pre-Islamic.
This stuff is very old, of course. Who knows when it begins? We don't have any kind of attestations of it, but this is, you got to figure out a way to get it to rain.
My point is that he's like, and everyone in the audience is understanding. This sheikh is saying that he knows like way back. He's not saying his great grandpa
No. This was his grandparents were doing this, man.
Wow.
This was in terms of history. This was yesterday. You see
That's what I was wondering. Yeah,
his grandparents were doing this. He said, he said he never did this. He said, I didn't do any of this. Right? I was too young for this. But my grandparents used to do this, and he still knows the song.
Wow. Okay.
He still knows the song. How cool is that?
Cool. That's real cool.
He still knows the song. His grandparents, and this is how they were getting the rains to come. They would dress up this wooden idol and like Al-Ghayl and sing her songs and run up and down the valley with her, which is tremendous. So my point being here is that those rituals survived really to our day. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
So they were certainly around. Stories like this, folk practices and all this business were certainly around among nomads, among people in the countryside during Ibn al-Kalbi's time in the Abbasid period. Okay? Now, what I would take those kind of tidbits there as witnesses to some kinds of rituals, right? But it's the broader historical framework in which they're inserted. You see what I mean?
Yes.
It's the historical interpretation of those things. So, for example, I could imagine that this is something these people are doing, and what ends up happening is, and it's probably true, right? That the ritual that I just described to you was practiced in some kind of way in pre-Islamic times, for sure, right? I mean, this is thousands of years of continuity. That's fine. But saying that, oh, now we know about this ritual, assigning it to a particular tribe and then doing it to a particular god, all and fitting it within that broader historical framework, that becomes sometimes, let's say, problematic. That becomes something that we need to sort of scrutinize. It doesn't mean it's wrong. We just need to scrutinize it. What are the motivations for this story being told to begin with, right? So for me, it's you have this meeting point. You always have data, but the question is, what do you do with it? What do you do with that data? And that's what we really need to scrutinize. We confuse the data checking out with the interpretation checking out.
Exactly.
Right.
So technically for the viewer, like you're saying, there may be elements of actual historical reality to these folklore type of cultic settings of nomadic people practicing with this certain goddess or this certain god, pouring milk on a stone or this or that, or slaughtering an animal to sacrificing it to this, whatever it might be. There may be actual historical precedents for that. It's the setting that's being put in, kind of like, for me, to give an analogy, and the viewer might follow me because we always do Bible so much on MythVision, is the story of Abraham. Now, scholars do not think this really goes back to the Ur of Chaldees from like way, way back, and Abraham was a real historical guy. The critical scholars say, no, this is a later story, but it might reflect something that's truthful even in the 5th century BCE, with looking back to what's going on in Babylon with cults and people having idols in their own households and whatnot. And here they are writing an etymology for their founding hero that just so happens to be from the place that conquered them, Babylon. So the historical setting may be kind of propagandistic and needs to be scrutinized, but there may be a reality to some setting of cultic practice and worship and stuff of a certain deity or deities. And this is the point you're kind of drawing.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's always that principle of you should never confuse the part for the whole.
Right. Exactly.
That's it. And so that's what's tricky. That's what really complicates working with this Jahili material about pre-Islamic Arabia, is that we have an interpretive lens that is produced by all of the considerations in the Islamic period. And then we have data that some of it may be genuine, so we have no idea really how to tell any of that, right? So it's very tricky to kind of understand pre-Islamic Arabia if we're after what it was actually like instead of what people thought it was like. It's sort of hard to distill that from this kind of material.
May I just ask you this in light of that? Because I'm sorry I'm poking in, but I feel like it's necessary to get this knowledge. Please. The reason is there's not mass production of literature in this period in this region at the time, correct? It's an oral society for the most part, and you're going to be showing some interesting stuff, I imagine, inscription wise, but like, doesn't that help us? Or correct me if I'm wrong. I just thought the reason why we have these particular interpretations and that's what we go with instead of alternative views is there's not this mass amount of evidence of people writing before that are saying this is what it is that we have preserved. Or am I mistaken?
I'm happy to say that you're mistaken.
Good. Yes. I am too, because there's tons, but that's what we're out in the deserts for. Got it.
That's where it is. That's what we're exploring for, because that's where it is. Yes, in the popular imagination. So if you were writing on this like early 19th century and before that, even if you were, trying to work out, what pre-Islamic Arabia looked like, this would be all the material you had. Okay. And you would say, well, the Arabs before, and I'm using the term Arabs here to refer to the entirety of the population, what we might call the geographic Arabian Peninsula today. All right, regardless of whatever languages they spoke. We would say that the Arabs were, illiterate, didn't write anything, completely oral culture and all this business. And so you throw your hands up and you say, this is what we need to make do with. But since the middle of the 19th century, actually even in the early 19th century, but onwards and really picking up steam in the 20th century, and then the golden age would be the early 21st century, which we're in right now, is the exploration of the Arabian Peninsula epigraphically and archaeologically. And this has produced, what are we at now? Maybe 100,000 texts. And that is the tip of the iceberg. I mean, there is more and more and more. A lot of these texts are short, but when you deal with such a huge quantity, it all adds up. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
And some of them are long and very historically informative, but there is material there. Now, why is that important? Because now we're no longer forced to, let's say, deploy this whole repertoire of, theoretical thinking to try to sort out what's going on in a source like Kitab al-Asnam. What we can do now, really, is we can consult this material and start sketching an evidence-based history of this period. And then we can go back to a work like Kitab al-Asnam and start to understand what Ibn al-Kalbi was working with. You see what I mean?
Yes.
What kind of material, what was there? Does it match it? Does it not match it? If it doesn't match it, can we explain why?
Right.
And if it does match it, does it match it because it's just what everyone was doing? Because I think, for example, if somebody said the pre-Islamic Arabs sacrificed to their gods, I think that's completely a meaningless thing to say. That's true of every society. And of course, it's going to be true. Of course, it's going to match, right? But it would be match if you said about the Greeks, if you said about anybody else, right? Everyone was always sacrificing. But there are some details. There are some details which I think are very useful. And we might be able to talk about those later, right? But there are some details that do check out, that show that there is some degree of memory. But then in other ways, there's a lot of generative stuff going on where things are clearly not being recalled, creatively composed in this period. You see what I mean?
Right.
Yeah. So this is the exciting moment now. We are finding out about really what is a lost world, right? A world until until relatively recently in the timeline of things, we would say that the only way we had to access this world was through these literary sources, but no longer, right? And that's what's very exciting.
This, just to comment as we're going into the images, because I want to get right into what you found and the discoveries and just kind of discuss what you're take us through it, is similar to what we have experienced with the Bible. The Bible gives us this idea, this image that is drawn from various authors over periods of time. And then you go and you find out, oh my gosh, we found an inscription from a pharaoh, or an inscription from an Assyrian king, Ashurbanipal II, or we found the Epic of Gilgamesh, or we find, all sorts of evidence that might compete or even say something that might be different from what we're told. Sometimes it lines up, at least in terms of the data, like you talked about, but the interpretation is completely different. And that might tell us something about each culture and what they're trying to do with their propaganda. I don't mean propaganda in a negative way. You could take it that way if you'd like, but it's more like this is their culture and the way they want to tell the story. We've figured out more. So I imagine if we get this evidence that you're describing, we let it speak and try to understand it without other influences causing us to have an interpretation. That's what I'm in for.
I mean, that's in the ideal world, that's what we want to do. But this is written evidence, right? And written evidence says nothing on its own. This is what I teach, of course. A lot of what I teach deals with, literary sources and written evidence. And students immediately want to say, well, what does the text really say? Right? What does it really say?
Right.
And it doesn't say anything. No text says anything. All the texts require a reader, right? I mean, this is what you know. And that's true of epigraphic text, right? They all require a reader. So whether we like it or not, when we come to these texts, we are bringing what we know with us, all right? We bring with us what we know to understand them. And sometimes things are not clear, right? But ultimately, our goal is to understand these texts as their authors understood them. Right. That's our goal. And we want to bring that out. And it's a very difficult sort of situation. So I'll give you a short example, something that's quite fun. In my latest book, Religions and Rituals of the Nomads of Pre-Islamic Arabia, I spent some time trying to figure out how these nomads dealt with death, which is, of course, an important theme for any religious, let's say, ideology, right? Or framework or anything of that sort. So how did they, pre-Islamic times, deal with death? So we look at their burials, right? Now, there is this word in Safavidic. These are the inscriptions that come from the ancient Arabian inscriptions that come from the Black Desert in Jordan, Syria, northern Saudi Arabia. This material is fantastic. I'm completely in love with this material, even though other things are sort of, taking my attention away from it in recent times. A lot of this Paleo-Arabic stuff, I have to say, but my heart is always with Safavidic. Corpus is old, but we don't know exactly how old. I would say the oldest we can put it is maybe 3rd century BCE, maybe 4th, based on one inscription. We don't know really when it ends. Anyway, huge corpus, 50,000 texts or something of that sort. There's a word in one of these inscriptions. Usually it's called, and the word is written STR. It's related to an Arabic word sitr, which means shelter, okay, or tent or whatever. Mm-hmm. So the way scholars have almost always interpreted this, all right? Actually, I've completely interpreted this until my sort of cavalier suggestion recently, is that it's just a tent. And usually it occurs in sentences. He built the sitr. He built this thing. He built the tent. I say he built the tent. Great. And it's just a text that for some mundane reason, the guy is recording building a tent or setting up a tent, whatever you like. That's what the text says, right? The problem is that's what the text says if you just open up an Arabic dictionary and find the word that looks like it. But what does the text really say? So I looked at this word sitr in its broader context, and it very, very often occurs in conjunction with funerary monuments and grieving for the dead. All right. So you have, he built the funerary monuments and the sitr. Now that's sort of weird if it's just a random tent you want to sleep in. Why would you say you built funerary monuments and then built your tent to sleep, put up your tent to sleep in? Or he built a grave or a cairn and the sitr and this tent. So something wasn't quite adding up, right? It's just weird. Why do they keep building tents around graves? You see what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, what is that? So what the text actually said, which is if you opened up an Arabic dictionary, which is it's just a shelter, a tent to sit in and protect yourself from the elements. When we look at it in its original context, it gives us pause. We start to scratch our heads. We say, well, I don't know. But what we see in the ancient Near Eastern context, if we look back to the ancient Near Eastern context, we see that a lot of funerary installations, South Arabia, but also in the Levant, in Sam'al, for example, you would commemorate the dead, but you would also have something like a ritual guest chamber where mourners would come and spend time in and feast with the dead or something of this sort. Right? So it was part of it. There was, in other words, there was a complex ritual life connected to the dead. The inscriptions are not describing for us in clear terms because it was obvious to their authors. They knew what they were doing. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
But, what if this tent that they're building functioned in the same way? It was a ritual shelter that the mourners would come and occupy to perform mourning rituals. You see what I mean?
Right.
I found one inscription where records some guy doing the ritual grieving, which is wagama. It's ritual grieving for the deceased in the sitr. So a guy is grieving in it. So, okay, that's very close. And looking at more things, I basically came to the conclusion that this tent is, even though if we just read it as the text says, it's not that. If we look at it more broadly, this tent is a ritual shelter associated with rituals to commemorate and mourn the dead. One reviewer scoffed and said that is just very creative, but you see what I mean?
Wow. Yeah.
Now, like I said, I wanted to build the image of Safavidic religion primarily based on those sources. I wanted to avoid as much as I could bringing material from outside, especially the Arabic literary tradition, because that then forms a lens.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And then I start to read Safavidic as if it were, later Arabic text. And that's very dangerous. You start to miss things. So let's see as much as we can what it says. Let's interface it maybe with ancient Near East, which I think is something closer to it culturally. Okay, fine. I was just reading randomly a review. In the review of this book by a fantastic scholar, Mohsen Goudarzi, he was reviewing a book by I can't remember whom, and in one of his footnotes, he mentioned a practice that was recorded in very early Islamic period that had been forbidden by Islam, where some mourners, which is the excessive grieving for the dead, such that what did they do? When someone dies that they love, they construct a tent on his grave. Now that is fantastic. I mean, that's basically it.
Yeah.
Right? That's it. But I think that as these traditions were remembered, they knew about people putting tents on graves, but they didn't quite understand what they were for. Right. So the memory of the tent on the grave was there. But the way that they're described more broadly is they said they would dwell in the tent for an entire year, mourning it. Maybe. But I think that, that probably belonged to a whole ritual complex that is lost to us now.
Right.
You see what I mean?
Yep. Kind of like an ancestral kind of, I don't want to say worship, but you could see why someone might take it that way.
The point is, if you don't, how do you keep someone alive who dies? Right? What is ultimately, there is this desire on the part of not only our pre-Islamic Arabians, but of all ancient and modern, to survive in this world somehow the demise of their body. And the Greeks had it, right? It was the idea, the everlasting fame or what have you, right?
Yes.
We'll look at the Egyptian monuments. I mean, basically the idea is that your memory needs to survive your body. And you stay in this world so long as you remember. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
And so these complex rituals with inscriptions that name the deceased, and you have people who annually visit the grave, right?
Today we do it with tombstones.
Yes, precisely. You read the name of the deceased, you feast with them, you have this whole ritual complex. It's a way of keeping that person alive. In a way, it is the post-mortem persona. You want to keep that around, huh? You see what I mean?
Yes. And, I love this, by the way. You brought up the Greeks. They would bring food and water and milk and stuff to the deceased and expect them to drink and eat because they're still alive somehow.
They are, yes. And so our guys are there as well. So when you see this, so you see what's going on. You have this kind of complex web of material that you need, that all informs how we understand just a simple line in an epigraphic text. You see what I mean?
Yes.
All of that you see, and then their world starts to come to life to you, and you say, aha, this is, and in some ways it's familiar, in some ways it's not. These are not the Islamic period literary sources that help us understand this ancient material, but they cannot dictate what was there. You see what I mean?
Yes.
And we need to bring other things, and then ultimately that world starts to come to life to us. And it is in many ways, a very different world, a very exotic world. And the meaning, so a lot of people, when they read through like a Safiotic dictionary, they say, well, why does this word mean this? Well, I'm giving you sort of the context for why the word means this. The word very rarely means exactly what it means in the Arabic dictionary, unless it's a simple word like he pastured raya, right? Fine. But these culturally specific words, process of figuring out what they mean is incredible. It's an adventure. I'll tell you another story in this line to sort of contextualize this, if that's okay. Do we have time?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Check this out. In 2019, we discovered, we got to this wadi. We drive. Let me give you sort of a picture so you can get an idea of what I'm talking about here.
Okay. You want me to share the screen?
Is my screen sharing? I'm sharing my screen.
I'm sharing it now.
Okay,
yeah.
All right.
You let me know when you want to show an image because I haven't shown any yet till now.
Okay, good. Let me show you something of the landscape here, okay? Let me see what we got here. All right, so look at these beautiful landscapes. Can you, all right, excellent. Aha, you see?
Yes.
So this is what the Black Desert looks like, right? So you have these wadis here. Now, this is the summertime, all right? So everything's dead. The world is dead. But in ideal times, these wadis can be quite lush, filled with herbage, water. People are going to be having a good time there. And then you've got these hills, hill country full of rocks. Very, very rugged terrain. Beautiful. For me, this is paradise. I'm completely in love with this place. But we're talking about when you're out there, like this last season, it's about 115 Fahrenheit or so. What's that, like 45 or something? I don't know. But that's just the temperature on your device. Notice all the rocks are black.
Oh,
so that is, you see, it's like you're in a sauna. It's literally a sauna. And then you're doing, pretty good cardio, right? In those conditions, it's tremendous. So I'll explain, I'll give you some stories about that. But so you're hiking around here. So we're going, this is a relatively easy wadi, but some wadis are filled with boulders. So the cars can't go in there and you just need to kind of hike in the wadi. Okay. So we're hiking, we got to this wadi. It's a beautiful place. And we start hiking. And our goal is to hike about 8 miles down the wadi to another point where the cars can come meet us and get us, right? So they'll go around and meet us at the end of this particular area. About an 8-mile hike, all the while serving. We've got 2 teams, one on this side, for example, one on the other side, serving in this kind of, you've got to fan out to make sure you see everything and document.
So you're looking at these rocks just to make sure we're on the same page, looking for any potential inscription or epigraphic evidence.
Absolutely. And archaeological sites.
Right.
Now check this out. So we go, we're walking down, maybe we're about 1.5 miles in, and the wadi is very steep here. I mean, you've got like, maybe it's about 700 feet tall or so, right? So it's quite high, and it is pretty steep, maybe more than a 45-degree angle, pretty steep. And you've got to kind of climb. It almost becomes rock climbing to get up there.
Holy.
But we get up there, right? And just to kind of even further contextualize that, you should wear gloves. I never wear gloves, and it's stupid because I tear my hands up. But you should wear gloves because the rocks, you could cook egg, like you could fry an egg on these rocks. Because it's so hot, right? It's fantastic. I mean, you're talking, like I said, this is paradise. It's amazing. So we get to the top of the wadi, all right? And this is a survey mission. So we're just surveying. We don't have an archaeologist with us. We reach this place and we look at it. Whoa, what's going on? We go forward and you have clearly some kind of installation. But what is it? One area, you have a circle, cleared out circle, perimeter, and all of the rocks on that circle are inscribed, filled with inscriptions. Okay. Then you have a corridor that goes to the edge of the wadi where you have another stone circle. And then another corridor going south that leads to another stone circle. So you have sort of like an L. All right. And these stone circles with them in the middle, you have inscriptions. So I go to these inscriptions. I start reading them. You have to read on the field because otherwise you don't know what you're getting. And there are consequences for this. So we start reading them. What's going on? This is some kind of burial installation, something that we've never seen before. It's for a woman called Gub. She's a very important woman, all this kind of business, right? She has about 40 people coming to mourn her. And this installation is called a thiyat.
A thirat?
T-H-Y-T, thiyat. Okay?
Oh, okay.
All right, this is what they call it. So now we know the name of the installation, which is very cool. We know that this installation, it comes from the verb thawaya, which means to rest. So this is a rest.
Got it.
So one of these things must be a grave. All right, something's going on here. All right, something very, very interesting going on. We document it. We document all the inscriptions. So who is this woman Gub? Well, Gub is described in these inscriptions with the verb ain ra sin. Maybe it's arus. There are no vowels. We don't know. Now, if you look in the Arabic dictionaries, that means bride. Okay, that means bride. Fine, bride. Why not? She's bride. Is that what it is? Is that really what it means? I have no idea. It's the only time the word has ever occurred in the corpus. Is she a bride? Is she about to get married? Well, I don't think so. Here, I'll share another photo. Nearby, and this is just again to show you how important she was. You see this inscription here is very nice. Yes. Now, I'm not going to worry so much about the Greek here. Okay. The Greek is very nice, right? Very interesting. And this talks about bilingualism among these nomads. There's all that business. But this little inscription here is very nice. It's by a guy called Wa'il. He calls himself Ba'al Gub. He is the husband of Gub.
Okay.
So she's so important that this guy is identifying as her husband. Huh? Oh. Can you imagine how important she is? Which also tells us that she's not a bride. She's been married. Huh? So what does this word arasa mean? I have no idea. What does it mean? So, and then this was in 2019. COVID happened. We couldn't come back for a while. Then I got distracted and went other places. So this year we came back. This year I brought an archaeologist with us and we excavated the site. Now I can't give away much yet. That's coming later. That's going to be done in publication. We excavated the site. Huge stuff are coming. Amazing stuff. All right. But excavating the site didn't tell us what the word arus or aras or aris, whatever meant. We didn't know what this word meant. So we're surveying, I'm not an archaeologist. We have the archaeologist working. At the same time, we're surveying and doing other things. We're in another valley, and one of the things that the local Bedouin love to do is they build way markers, kind of piles of stones, cairns, just to mark ways, right? And oftentimes, unfortunately, what they do is they dismantle older structures. They dismantle, ancient things to build these markers, okay? Okay, fine. All right, so you're going to try to get at them, and sometimes there's very interesting things in them. So we're at one, and I look, and I'm looking at it, and right at the base of it, sticking out of the dirt, it had been covered with dirt, there's a stone, and the very end of an inscription is parent, and the very end of the inscription says that same word again, arus or aris or whatever it is. It's that same word. It's occurred again for the second time only. We need that inscription. Now we need to figure out what this is. So I'll show you what we ended up doing. So of course we dismantled this modern way marker, which was a tremendous amount of work to do. And let me see here. Yeah. And so we dug out, we took it all apart and we dug out the inscriptions. You see them?
Yes.
Wow. And there, we dug them out, and there is the text here. And this is a text mourning, not a woman this time, but a man who seemed to have been rather important. We don't know because they dismantled the original structure. We have no idea what was actually there, whether it was something like a thiyat or not. We don't know because they dismantled it to build this thing. And he is this time arus or aris or whatever. So that's very interesting. And so it's a gender neutral term, or at least it's inflecting like it does in Arabic with vowels, not with endings. And it seems to be a kind of title, a social title. I wonder if it has to do with nobility. And then later on over time in Arabic, that title just ends up meaning bride or grooms or whatever you like, right?
Right.
But that it's originally a noble title, and that we're looking at the burial of noble individual in this society. I don't know. Very interesting. But that is, we can call this, to use Macintosh Smith's term, this is dictionary land. This is how we figure out what things mean, right?
And
So
I
it's
see the
really,
cool inscription to the right over there as
yeah,
well.
yeah, that was also buried there. Yeah, that's just that one is fun. You got a camel and these big this is what they call the common script or what have you. But this is a different one here. So these are two different
Right.
kind of groups. But this whole place was filled with inscriptions. We found so many fun stuff here, so many fun things, tremendous adventures, and but lots of work. You know, these things are these rocks are heavy,
Yeah,
and
I bet. I
like I
can
said, I
tell.
haven't been to the gym in years, so I'm completely out of shape. So but you're motivated. You've got adrenaline running. You're excited. So you start to have the strength you used to have when you, you did go to the
Yeah.
gym, and you end up doing these things, but you feel it in the morning. But it's a lot of fun. So it's really good. And that's the quest for even what a single word can mean. It can take
Wow.
years and exploration just to figure out, or just to come closer to figure out what a single word might. Isn't that
So,
tremendous?
in light of this, absolutely. In light of this, and I want to see some more images if you don't mind, but like,
Yeah.
I think because I like to jump around and look at other cultures and try to get an idea that might contextualize or at least give something. And being these are noble people, as we know in the ancient, not just Near East, but you can go to Greece, Macedonian regions. You could look at this, Egypt, etc. They deify noble people, and I'm wondering if any of that might be playing a role here in these people in this culture of deifying these noble individuals. I don't know. I mean, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, that's a good question. With our nomads, I mean, we don't have any good evidence for that yet of ancestor
Okay,
worship or any of this. But the Nabateans seem to have turned one of their kings into a god. So
right,
one of their kings, Ubudat, Hellenized Obodas, he ended up becoming a god.
got
So
it.
he was revered to the point that he became a god. He gets called Ubudah, Alaha, Ubudat the god, and what have you. So it's quite something.
So back on
So
Bride, though, just because this is your thing and you're really trying to point out something powerful about how do we get behind this and figure out what the language meant to
what
them.
anything meant, yeah.
What
Yeah.
anything meant.
Yeah.
Bride is what it seems to be understood by people today, or at least based on the definition
Yeah.
in Arabic.
Yeah.
What are you nudging toward in your subjective opinion right now? Like, what are you thinking it might mean, even if, we aren't sure?
Yeah, I mean, the problem with these Safavidic inscriptions is we don't know we don't know very much about their social structure. What's very curious is that the inscriptions give us tribal affiliations. There's only one title that seems to tell us anything about their social structure. It's the title Haddai, which refers to a military leader. Okay. That's it. So we really don't know very much about their internal hierarchy. Surely there was some kind of hierarchy. Surely they were what we might call shuyukh, sheikh, right? Tribal lord or king or what have you.
Right.
There must have been, maybe his family members were important. If we look at earlier sources, for example, the Assyrians talk about Arab kings and queens from this area. And so I start to wonder whether I think that this term here might have to do with like a chief, right? A tribal chief of some sort. And what ends up happening, and that's very interesting that you have a female in this position, right? And she clearly was very important because look, this guy is identifying himself as her husband. Right. So she's an important person socially. I wonder if this has to do with some kind of, it's a position of authority, okay, in the tribe. I think that that's what we're getting at. Right. And you might think of an analogy of how, for example, you might use the term princess today to talk about a beautiful young woman. You see what I mean? It's lost its meaning in a literal sense. We don't have, let's say in America, we don't have princesses, right? That title that is not there anymore. We don't have royalty, but the word survives to talk about, either a spoiled young girl or a beautiful little girl, or you will use it, oh, she's a princess. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
And if all that survived was American English, you would say, oh, princess means sweet little girl. But then you go and find an ancient text where it's like, hold on, they're using princess in a way that doesn't really match the meaning we have.
Because we don't know their social culture.
Yes, precisely. Because when that structure changes, words will survive, but they'll take on different meanings.
Got
it
it.
Seems that we're peering back in a time where the meaning bride actually, or groom or whatever, had a different meaning, right? It referred to something in their social structure. That changed over time, where they got new terms, and then it just continued only in this very restricted sense to refer to a special day for a young woman or a young man, which is their wedding day, where everyone gets to be a prince or a princess on their wedding day. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
So that's looking at, and that, it seems like such a small point, right? But the only way to ever have been aware of any of that is hiking around over here, digging up stuff and crunching, and it's, you see, this is the whole experience, right?
Yeah.
It's amazing. Yeah.
I love this. You're bringing back to life a culture we don't really know much about at all, if anything.
Yeah.
And I want to know more about these things because I love learning about For me, as you know, I'm a skeptic. I wear that as a badge of honor. But like my point is I think that there's a whole world, a fascinating world of anthropological research we can do on understanding why religions are the way they are, why cultures function the way they do, why politics in regions act the way they do. And I'm a skeptic because I want to push against letting the lens of a particular tradition help us interpret the rest of the world. Because what I really want to do is break down all those walls. Do you have any more images you want to show us of your trip that you'd be like wanting?
I can, there's I very quickly before our meeting here put together some images, some fun stuff. I'll tell you another story that's very fun. This one's brand new. I put an image of it. This is brand new. I'll bring this up here, right here, and we'll talk about it. So this is from this last season of field work. Okay, what is this? All right, you see? All right, so this is clearly man-made.
Clearly,
somebody went and made a stone rectangle like this. Very interesting. What is it? I don't know. We didn't have enough time. We'll see what we do with it in the future. We documented it and we might go back if there's something interesting. But if you zoom in, I'm going to zoom in and you're going to see why this place is even more interesting. You see?
I didn't even notice
cool is that, huh?
That's
Isn't
awesome.
That amazing?
Yeah.
Right. Fantastic. So not only is this man-made, but it's an inscribed hole again.
Same language?
Oh, it's all Safiric, yeah. So it's an inscribed hole again. Whoa, okay, so what's going on here? Now, we photographed these things. We documented them. There wasn't time to read every single one. What was very clear is that this is some kind of mourning complex. Some dude died. They're remembering him. They all set up these beautiful stones, wrote on them, remembering him. Tremendous. I have a 14-hour flight back, huh? So what do? I'm just reading everything that we've documented in the field. All right. On one of the stones over here, secondary inscription, somebody came and wrote, very thin, lightly inscribed, a tremendous inscription. And so I'll set it up this way. In recent times, there's been a lot of discussion about Allah before Islam, right? The God Allah, who is of course, the name of God in Islam. You know, what is the pre-Islamic context? Because Allah was worshipped in pre-Islamic times. But who was he? We don't have any kind of liturgical text associated with him. We have some very basic prayers. So, for example, we have at Qariyat al-Fawad inscription, a gravestone where some guy wants to protect the grave of his brother. So he invokes Kahal, Allah, and Athar al-Shariq, these three gods, Allah being one of them, to, protect the grave. Fine. But that doesn't really tell us anything about this deity. We don't know anything. Okay, he's part of a triad. That's what, from an Islamic perspective, they would say that shirk, fine. Association, but that's not new. But we know nothing about him. Fine. He had some interesting prayers to Allah. One that's very, very interesting. And now you'll see where we're going with this. This prayer was by a man who had just been appointed a military commander. And so what does he do? Aslaya. He makes a burnt offering. Wa aqsama billah hayya. And he swore an oath by Allah, Hayya, who is living. And you're like, whoa, that's nice. That's interesting to talk about a living God. Now we're a little bit in business, that he will lead with greatness. Okay, fine. But, that's just a glimpse. Allah occurs in Safiric at the time that I wrote my book 41 times. All right. We don't know anything about him. Now, I have some ideas of it. Allah is clearly an epithet, meaning it's not the proper name of a god. It literally means it literally means the God. Okay, so it's an epithet, like the great God. The fact that it has the al-definite article tells us that the Safiric guys, so the guys out here in the desert, that they took this god from their neighbors because they like to use the definite article ha. They don't use al, but the Nabateans use al. So it's very likely that they took this god from the Nabateans. They brought him over. Okay, fine. But who is he? What do we know? So we found an inscription here. Now I have a preliminary study of that. I found this on the airplane. I'm sitting there, working through this stuff 14 hours, and I come across this one, and your eyes go big, and you're like, oh my God, what am I reading? This is incredible. So the inscription, just to put it, I won't show it because I need to publish it soon. But the inscription begins with a guy lamenting the widespread, basically afflictions were all over the place. The land had been afflicted. All right, it's bad. So he calls out to Allah, oh Allah, Nura, bestow light, Nur, all right, bestow light, which is a really weird prayer. Usually when these Safiric guys ask for things, they're practical things, spoil, revenge, rain, but light is really something intangible. I mean, what is Nur? And Nur, which is very interesting, is light that's associated with the moon. Okay, so one of the epithets of the moon in Safiyedic is Na'ir, which is the illuminated one, but using the same word nur. Right? Even in the Quran, you have to pick up on this. God creates, he makes the sun, وَجَعَلَ الشَّمْسَ ضِيَاءً, he makes the sun ضِيَاء, وَالْقَمَرَ نُورًا, and the moon nur, right? So it's connected with the nur. But of course, also in the Quran, Allah, God, is nur as-samawati wal-ard. He is the nur of the heavens and the earth. Okay, right. Which is very interesting. So what you have in this inscription already is sort of an antecedent of Quranic diction, where nur, light, a very abstract thing to be asking for, is associated with Allah. But it even gets better. Our man then says that he made a sacrifice, some kind of sacrifice, bi binyatihi, or bi binyatoh in Safiyedic, in his temple, binya, in his temple. And binya, this word here is actually one of the words used to describe the Kaaba. Now, that's not saying this man went to Mecca. No. What we're saying is that there is a complex of vocabulary here associated with this deity. And one of it is the temple associated with this deity is called the Binyat, which is very important. Otherwise, in Safiyedic and North Arabian, temples are usually called Bait. Okay, fine. This one is the Binyat. So he does that. And then he makes his request. He asks Allah, awahabannahu, and may he bestow upon him hitta, all right, a portion. Fine. But what is the epithet of Allah in this final clause? The epithet of Allah in this final clause is dhu khalaqa, the one who has created. And it's the same verb in the Quran used for creation, khalaqa, which is an Arabic isogloss. Okay? And what is the basic meaning of this verb? It means to split. So we have, again, now in a pre-Islamic Arabian context, we can see that the creation of the universe belongs to this basic splitting action that we find in all of the other ancient Near Eastern traditions.
Exactly.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah, you got this in
But
Genesis.
what does that tell us, man? This is what's so important. When we encounter these things in the Quran in the 7th century, we say, is this the impact of the Hebrew Bible?
Right.
Or Jewish liturgy on the Quran? Is that the impact of, let's say, the Arabians interacting and taking over from those traditions? And that's why Allah is described in such a way, because he's the monotheistic God. So he's described in such a way there. But then having it attested 600 years before the Quran in a completely pagan context. And these Safavid guys are pagans, man.
Right.
They are worshiping, 50, 60 gods, and that's the ones we know about. And they have no problem worshiping Allah beside other gods. They do it all the time. But in this completely pagan context, we see the same package of vocabulary and concepts that appears in the Quran. So this precludes direct borrowing, but rather speaks to what? It speaks to a shared Near Eastern mythological heritage, where the cosmos is created through the act of splitting, separating, right?
Yep.
This is it, and that's the verb khalaqa there, already in Safiyedic, right? Arabic isogloss associated with Allah at his temple, asking him for nur. It all comes together, and it's all, we're saying 600-700 years before the Quran.
If I may, can I ask some questions and probe here a little? This is
ask as many questions as you like, my friend.
Goodness, this is amazing. I love this. This is what I live for today. I always describe this, and this may not work. This may not be up your alley, but I did a video recently highlighting the work of Francesca Stavrakopoulou, who wrote a book called God and Anatomy. I have right here. And in this book, she blows my mind with how anthropomorphic the deity of the Hebrew Bible is, and pretty much showing God has a body, but not just that. It's a bit scandalous because some of the stuff that God is behaving and doing is what passionate humans do, from sex and children and war and hate and all this stuff, right?
Yeah.
Well, I describe it as like seeing the magic trick after believing that David Blaine had real magical powers, and then someone's whispering in the auditorium, "Do you want to see how the trick is done?" And I'm like, it's not a trick, it's real. And then I find out, they show me how the trick is done, and it's very man-made. I'm like, whoa! People would think, oh, therefore you don't want to look into it anymore because you now know that the magic isn't real. Not true. For me, I now want to know more. I need to have a deeper understanding because now I need to know. And I'm looking at this, and here's some of my questions. You have a rectangular kind of squarish kind of structure here. I'm curious to know if you think this is a prototype of some Kaaba type indication. Total guesswork, and we are in speculation land here. I'm just having fun with you. So please forgive me, and the audience forgive me. So you don't know. Is this first century? Oh, please comment on that if you want.
Very good. No, I would say that, there's a lot written. So the Kaaba that we see today is not the construction that was there during the ministry of Muhammad.
Got it.
So there we had more of a sort of tabernacle-like construction. And it later becomes this sort of cube, but more of a tabernacle kind of tent-like thing. So similar to our sitter that we talked about earlier, right? This kind of ritual tent. Okay. So that's what we're dealing with the kind of foundation. Now, in that light, was there ever anything inside of this? Did people construct something inside of this? I have no idea. What I will say is that this construction here, seems to have been produced as a way of commemorating a slain individual. Okay. So it's a way of commemorating someone who had died. I can't remember his name, but it's on one of those rocks. They're not those inscriptions that commemorate the dead, or they all say the same thing. So they're not very interesting. They don't stand out. So the question is, what brought this man here who wrote the Allah inscription? So this must have been some kind of ritual site, because something brought him here and he commemorated all of this ritual activity here. Okay. There's so much archaeology to be done. Right. And that we might get to something, we might not. I mean, it's very, very often the case that, especially in these nomadic environments, traditional archaeology does not, what you expect to find through traditional archaeological work is not produced here. Like there's barely any pottery. Right. So rare to find any pottery, no coins. You're not dealing with constructions really. And if you look at this whole area, what's fascinating about it, there's no fire pits. There's no evidence that people would, actually lit fires here or anything. There's nothing datable in that sense. So it's very, very curious, right? We are just starting to know about the ritual world of these guys through archaeology. We're just starting.
Can we date this structure and the epigraphic evidence or
roughly paleographically only? Very roughly. I don't gamble. I'm not a gambling man. But if I were to gamble, I would say 2,000 years, turn of the era.
Okay, so roughly
first century BC to first century AD.
Got it. Okay. Another question I have, and this one's more in the avenue, I think the direction you were going at, because many people polemically online, right? I've engaged and encountered and all that, and I try not to get my hands dirty, but I live and I'm human. Give me a break. Okay. Sometimes I got to put the gloves on and get in the ring a little. But you'll notice a lot of the polemicists from apologists on Christian side, let's just say, against Islam, talk about how they just ripped off the Jews and ripped off the Christians. And I'm not saying there isn't some influence there, but the way they paint that narrative, what I find fascinating about what you just discussed is when I look back before Judaism, and I'm looking at Jonathan Adler, I'm looking at the archaeological epigraphic evidence of when the practice of the religion we call Judaism, meaning we're talking about Elephantine Judeans, they did not practice Judaism. They had polytheistic, clearly other gods along with El. Then you have other ones in the north. You have those in the Persian Empire, all sorts of different kinds of versions of Judeans worshiping these gods. They're polytheists. They have various gods. They had these kind of Near Eastern Genesis accounts of splitting and creation ideas that are found way before these religions existed. I'm curious to know if these cultures you're just discovering and trying to figure out what they meant and what they did, if there's just this long-standing all the way back to Ugarit, let's just say, like you're talking Phoenicians and Canaanites, this stuff's still alive in some way. The traditions evolve, of course, but they're still alive. And we have this parallel kind of concept. It's not necessarily having to come through Christianity directly, not necessarily having to come through Judaism directly. There's a still existing ancient Near Eastern religious culture, if you will, that this is what we're looking at. It's like we have this fossil that existed through time without necessarily going the route of, hi, I'm practicing Judaism, or hi, I'm practicing Christianity. It's just this fossil that existed, maybe going down from that period. Does that make any sense what I'm trying to do here?
I mean, I would say, it makes tons of sense. But I think, obviously everyone borrows from each other. I was at a conference more than a month ago, and I heard this lecture on the development about the Arabic grammatical tradition and its relationship with the Greek grammatical tradition and the Indian grammatical tradition from a fantastic scholar called Maria Mavrudi. And I asked a naive question because she was showing cases where Greek grammatical tradition was clearly, or she made a very compelling case that, it was influencing the Arabic grammatical tradition. And so I asked her, okay, so what was the original Arabic grammatical tradition, though? If we peel away this kind of Greek influences, Indian, what are we left in? And she told me, and she's right, and I like this response, and we have to use this when we think about our material too. She says, there is no such thing as an original anything. Everything is the end result of contact and influence, right? There is no pure state for any idea, it's all contact. It's all from the very beginning contact.
I love this.
It's and she's right. And I thought about it. I was like, yeah, well, I worded it wrong. What I was after is I wanted to know what, let's say, in the 6th century, before, the rise of the Medinan state, the Arabs had scribes and they had traditions. I wanted to know how they were talking about grammar then. But that's a chronological question. I used the word originality incorrectly because It's not about being original, being pure, uninfluenced by outside. No. Everything is a result of humans interacting with each other. You see, from day one, right? There's no pure culture, especially in the Near East. Okay, maybe someone's going to make a case. Well, what about the Sentinelese island or whatever? I don't know. Let's talk about the Near East, right? There's no, these are constantly interacting with each other. There's no originality here, right? But what we can say, and I think this is what's very nice about this inscription, is that the mythological complex of the creator God splitting through an act of splitting, creating the universe. And that creator God being light and bestowing light and all this business, that's very nice. Using the same vocabulary that we get later in the Quran, that precludes a late pre-Islamic synthesis. That precludes the idea that this kind of diction and even this concept emerged from a late interaction between Arabian followers of traditional Arabian religion and Judaism, or Northwestern Semitic mythological traditions. You see, in fact, it suggests that even in much more distant times, more ancient times, the Arabs had a cosmology that was related to biblical cosmology and Northwest Semitic or just general fertile crescent cosmologies. You see,
if I may chew this up and spit it back to you, correct me if I'm understanding you properly, because I think my viewers live vicariously through these kind of engagements, and it helps to solidify. Being that we're just putting this 1st century BCE to 1st century AD, it's already showing a cosmology that is uniquely ancient Near Eastern, with the splitting ideas and concepts from the region.
Absolutely.
Which means this culture, which exists 600 years, let's just say roughly, before the rise of Islam, there's already communication, to put it simply, among these mythos, these origin stories. And therefore, we should not necessarily, you can do with it as you will, but we shouldn't necessarily get to the 6th century, 7th century, really, but 6th turn of the 7th, where the rise of Islam comes in and go, there was no contact, there was no communication whatsoever. Like, no, it's probably, as far as we can tell, always been communication going on amongst these people.
Absolutely. And they are, I think it's useless to speak about things in terms of genetic inheritance, but what you have is this broader complex of ancient Near Eastern mythology that's sort of manifesting itself in different, let's say, societies. So the Arabians had their own take on it, right? But it's ultimately the same package of ideas.
Right.
We know that they worship Baal, right? Baal. He comes with his package of mythology. There's a beautiful poem, and now this one's very ancient. I don't know how we're going to date it, but it's a poem in Safiatic. I published it in 2015 that, and you'll recognize it immediately. And this should come as no surprise. وَلَثَّ مَوْتُ وَحَكُّ ثَرَامْ فَمُيَكَانُ خِلَافِ لَيَالَيْهِ وَأَيْوَامُهُ وَهَا بَعَلْ يَبِيتُ وَلَهُ بَاتُ مَا نَامْ. So you'll notice there's a nice end rhyme with 3-line short poem. I'm going to just translate it for you the way that I understood it, and you will get it. Mot, death, has held a feast. The scorner eats. Nice chiasm. Established is the alternation of his nights and days. And lo, Baal sleeps. Indeed, he sleeps, but he is not dead.
Wow.
What is that?
Oh my gosh, dude.
Right?
This makes me think of...
That's just the summary of the Baal cycle.
Yeah, I was going to say, because in that, from what I understand in the Baal cycle here, Baal dies, but comes back. And I'm not sure if this particular one is trying to describe that Baal will come back because he's only asleep.
Beautiful here is the verbs that are used. So the first verb used, ha Baal yabit. So, O Baal, he bata, which is a kind of sleep, but it means to spend the night. Okay? So he sleeps in that sense. Wama nam. But he did not nam. Nam is a slump, like a deep slumber, which can be used as a metaphor for death, but it still means sleep. So there are two different kinds of sleeps. So he sleeps temporarily, but not eternally.
Got it.
Now, what's wonderful is you get this kind of double sense of sleep. You find it in the Bible, where God is described as not slumbering or sleeping or slumbering, what have you. Like, it doesn't overtake him, right? Two types of sleep. Even in the Quran, in fact, in the Quran is nice because you end up with the same package of vocabulary. لا تأخذه سنة ولا نوم. So sina, which is a kind of sleep, does not overtake him, and neither does naum. Now, if we read that naum in light of the Baal cycle, we see that's death.
Got it.
Right, so it's the temporary sleep. So he's unlike Baal. He doesn't disappear for a little bit and come back. He's always there, right?
Got
the
it.
temporary sleep doesn't take him, and the eternal sleep doesn't take him. Whereas Baal, he succumbs to the temporary sleep, but he does not sleep forever. He's going to come back. You see? Now that again, another. So you can draw that line, and you see how we end up. So we see that we have this package of Near Eastern mythology, which is alive in Arabia, and then we hear its echoes in the Quran. We hear its echoes in the Quran. What do we make of those? Well, this material keeps pushing back, keeps suggesting that there's indeed continuity.
Yes.
Right? That makes its way into the Quran, right? It's not just because here's what we lack. And this is why I think what we're doing is so important. This is what we lack. We have all of this material, folklore, what have you, about pre-Islamic Arabian religion from the Islamic period. But we have no myths. We have no cosmology. We have no stories. We have nothing. We just have names of gods and people like doing rituals directed towards these fake gods, like pouring milk and sacrificing and singing and what have you. But we don't know what these gods actually did. We have no pantheon. We don't know their role in the cosmos. We don't know any of their myths. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
So this material now is actually bringing that world, that religious world, that supernatural world to life.
And when
we do that, now we start to see the connections. Now we have another reference, which isn't simply the Quran is taking from the Bible.
Right. Exactly.
The Quran, there are clear cases where the Quran is interacting with the Bible, and sure, but there are other cases like God splitting the world, splitting the universe, that have ancient antecedents in traditional Arabian religion. And the fact that it's using the same verb, this unique verb, khalaqa.
So philologically,
it works out very nicely. Yeah. This is the beginning. All right. So this is the beginning. I mean, I love this. There's so much to do. All right. There's so much to do. I know I have more material than I won't live long enough to treat all the material I have. Wow. Like it's just not, there's just too much. And there's going to be more and more and more. And that's true of everyone. So we're talking about, this is a generational project.
I have two questions pertaining to this we should do this again because I love learning this stuff from you and diving into this with you. There's so much insight and things to consider. One is hypothetical and it's totally speculative and it's kind of fun for me to use an analogy of something I know to this hypothetical situation with where we're trying to piece together detectively what's happening. And the other one is pertaining to from this epigraphic and archaeological evidence, which we would put around the 1st century BCE to 1st century AD. What about right up to, let's say, from that period up to the rise of Islam? How much evidence do we have in that span? Because you're talking 600 years. You see what I'm saying?
And very different places and all that business. So
let's start with that one and then my hypothetical next, if that's cool.
Okay. So what has distracted me from Jordan and from Safavidic over the last couple of years has been my work in Saudi Arabia. And if you give me my screen back, I'll show you some photographs.
Absolutely.
This is tons of fun. Yeah. So this is a completely different landscape. So this is West Arabia. You see how different it looks?
Yes.
This is
not
West
Black
Arabia.
Rock. It's a totally different.
Totally different environment. This is the Hijaz. All right. So this is where the drama of Islamic origins plays out. All right. This is West Arabia. This area here, we're in the northern Hijaz. This is an area called Tabuk, near Tabuk. Right, it's one of the northernmost settlements of what we consider the Hijaz. A very important place. This place is very interesting, and it's different from Safavidic guides in Jordan. Thousands upon thousands of inscriptions here. Okay, but we get here a lot of inscriptions that are going to be, and they also occur in Jordan. We'll talk about that too. But you get inscriptions of what we call the Paleo-Arabic script. So the Paleo-Arabic, all the Safavidic stuff, that is, let's say, a dead end. Okay. Those inscriptions, that writing system there goes extinct It does not continue on to be Arabic as we see it today.
We're not sure when it went extinct, but it went extinct before Arabic.
Sometime before the 5th century, let's say. By the time the Muslim philologists are active, this stuff is long gone. Okay? So it's long gone. I mean, I would say it's extinct by maybe the 5th century, but you might have stragglers, who knows? This is the Hijaz. This area, you have what you call Paleo-Arabic. Now, Paleo-Arabic is the latest stage of the Nabatean script. It's an Aramaic-based script. Begins in the Nabatean kingdom, which spanned at its greatest extent from Damascus to Egra and Tayma in North Arabia. So it's a very nice, very important place, kingdom. The Nabatean script over time develops, as all things do, into, by the time you get to the 6th century, the early 6th century, late 5th century, the letter shapes of this Nabatean script have evolved to a point where they are recognizably Arabic. They are basically the Arabic script, okay, that we know, that we use today, a descendant of which we use today. Now, these Paleo-Arabic inscriptions, which come from the 6th century, also early 7th century, okay, are also very important because they are a window, a very, very small, blurry window into the immediate environment out of which Islam emerged, okay, immediately. Safavidic guys are fun, but they're far away and a long time ago. A long time ago in a desert far, far away. That's the way a Meccan would understand the Safavidic guys, all right? Whereas this stuff here is directly relevant, all right? And these texts are wonderful because we surveyed around. we visited a text. So here's a picture of us documenting a nice Paleo-Arabic text. This comes from west of Tabuk. This inscription here is very, very nice. And I'll give you sort of an example into what we're dealing with. We'll zoom in a little bit, okay? So this is it.
Are those vandalizing marks, paint?
Yeah. These riffraff, they come by with spray paint cans and for some reason do this kind of stuff.
What in the world?
It's ridiculous. Yeah. I don't know why people do this. Here's the thing one has to keep in mind, and this is something that we should appreciate. If you look beyond the spray paint here, you look at the panel, you have dozens and dozens of inscriptions. You see? And these inscriptions span 1,000 years.
Right.
Okay. And if you pay attention, you'll notice that over 1,000 years, everyone who came to leave an inscription on this rock, what did they do? They carefully avoided other people's inscriptions. They did not vandalize. You see? They very carefully wrote around, beside, and what have you. Okay? They didn't damage other people's stuff. But here in the 20th and 21st century, vandalism.
Crazy.
Huh? That's crazy, huh? This is incredible, right? So for 1,000 years more, 2,000 years, even if we consider up to today, nobody did this. People just left it alone. Why? Why damage? What are you going to do? You need, education. Then spray paint. It's ridiculous. And yeah. So well, anyway, let's get to the fun. Zoom in here. This is a Paleo-Arabic inscription. You see it?
Yes.
This is the Arabic script. Very different than Safavidic, huh? Now the inscription says, "Bismika Allahumma." In your name, O Allah, O God. Ana Abd Shams bar al-Mughira yastaghfiru rabbah. I am Abd Shams, it's a guy called Abd Shams, son of al-Mughira, who seeks the forgiveness of his Lord. And the word for Lord being used here is Rabb, okay, which, recalls sort of Hebrew Aramaic liturgy, all right? This inscription here was carved sometime in the 6th century. Paleographically, some people try to identify the author. There's a guy known from Islamic literary sources called Abd Shams, son of al-Mughira, who was a Qurashite, someone from Mecca. So he might have been on a trip here and left this. It's a complex argument. There's a lot of weight to that, but we'll leave that aside. That's not of interest except for those concerned with kind of the minutiae of Arabic orthography and paleography. But anyway, that doesn't matter. What we have here is a 6th century inscription, and we see that it sounds nothing like the old traditional Arabian pagan inscriptions. This is an inscription of monotheistic devotion.
Right.
He is seeking yastaghfiru, he is seeking the forgiveness of his Lord, right? Now, there's some bad guys. So, for example, in South Arabia, you'll get these naughty guys who go to the temple and can't control themselves and end up having sex with women at the temple or doing this kind of, and then they get caught and they have to, they sinned, right? You can't do that in the temple, right? So they apologize and they have to pay a fine.
Got it.
This kind of forgiveness here is a little bit more intangible, isn't it? This is a moral offense somehow. This person he doesn't tell us what he's done. Sorry, not a moral offense. This is not a moral offense. He doesn't tell us what he's done, but you get the impression that he is a sinner.
Yeah, exactly.
He is just a sinner. And as a sinner, he's not seeking his forgiveness because he did something bad, but his state as a human, he's fallen, he's a sinner, and he needs God's forgiveness, right? The tone of the material is very different.
Right.
Right. Now, we're not dealing with traditional Arabian religion as we encounter it in Safavidic. This is a whole new world. All right. This is a whole new world. These inscriptions show us that the Safavidic guys, with all of their wonderful gods and paganism and all that business, they weren't in a kind of time capsule that just continued uninterrupted and uninfluenced until the rise of Islam. No, Arabia had transformed, and you start to have all of this permutation of the imperial monotheistic ideologies. So that here you have a man who has a pagan name, Ab Shams, a pagan name. I mean, his name means the worshiper of the sun. Okay,
right.
But whatever. I mean, it doesn't mean he's a pagan if he has a
of
name
course.
Like that. But it's
That's
still
like saying a theophoric name proves that someone is something, but they're not necessarily.
Yes, precisely. So it's a curiosity. It's fun. Anyway, so that's what he does there. Isn't that incredible, right? That's
amazing.
So this is very, very interesting. Now, one of the big problems in our field, you can leave my open because I'll open up another picture. One of the big problems, historical problems that really plagued Islamic origins for a long time is that, well, no one can seem to find Mecca anywhere. It's not mentioned in any text. It's not on any ancient maps, right? So there's a whole, the whole discourse about this.
Oh yeah.
And it's a legitimate problem if we want to maintain that Mecca was what later sources purport it to be, which is sort of the most important site in Arabia and the center of pilgrimage for all the tribes and all this business. It is a bit weird that no one seems to mention it. Yeah, it's strange, especially because in these late South Arabian inscriptions, late Sabbaic inscriptions, I mean, we get a very nice geography of Arabia, right? They're going all the way up to Iraq, right? So they've got, and then you've got, of course, the Roman geographers and all that business. So its absence, it's not the absence of evidence. Its absence is evidence. Okay. And that is the tricky thing. So there's a problem there. No one's going to cover that up. But it's even bigger problem for me, for the Imperial Umayyads to just make up a place, right? That's also a problem. So we have two problems here. Like this, the solution is that they just made up Mecca randomly.
Right. And
that's problematic too.
Yeah, there's so many things.
Yeah, that's problematic. You don't actually solve one problem by coming up with another problematic thing in the same way. Okay. So we're at a it's a bit tricky what we're dealing with here. So in 2021 and 22, I explored as much as I could in just these 2 seasons with my dear friend, brother, Haytham Sidqi, a tremendous man. We surveyed in this area, right? Our quest was to figure out what's going on. Is there anyone here? So we surveyed around Mecca. People say there's no inscriptions from Mecca proper. Well, yes, because it's a city. It's been expanded, concreted. You're not going to get any inscriptions from there, right? It's done, right? If there were any outcrops there in the past, they've been flattened. And it's just done, okay? So stop making that a point, saying we don't have an inscription from the city of Mecca. It's not going to happen.
Or the conspiracy theorists going, they laid it down to waste and built the city on top of it to cover up the possible path. I mean, there's always
no one is thinking in that way. It's just that in that period, the concept of salvage archaeology just wasn't in vogue. I mean, they weren't thinking in terms of salvage archaeology, right? Which was what people would do now. Anyway, but the areas around Mecca, okay, those survive. And so we surveyed the rocky outcrops around Mecca and so forth. And indeed, there are inscriptions there. There are Thamudic inscriptions, which take us back very far. So you can say people are hanging around there. It's not Mars. All right. Yeah. There are humans there hanging around. To what degree, whatever, I don't know, but there are people hanging around. They produce these inscriptions. We have them. That's interesting. But the real thing was to see, well, are there Paleo-Arabic inscriptions there? Are there inscriptions in the Arabic script? Because it's been problematized. Why are all our inscriptions in the Arabic script from the north? And there's nothing from around Mecca or what have you. And so when we were serving there in 2021, we did a lot. And in the morning, Haytham and I are sitting and we're having breakfast in the hotel. It's a bit more civilized to surveyor here in this area. We were in Taif, which is the city next door to Mecca. We're not on the desert all dirtied up, right? We have a nice hotel. We drive out, but it's a different environment. It's not Harra. Anyway, and so we're like, we're doing our research, as random research. And we knew there's this place. So we have older texts talking about different places, but there was no GIS. There's no coordinates. So you have no idea where these places are. There was one place called Zallala that none of the locals knew where it was anymore. It's like mentioned in the in older sources, but no modern locals knew where it was. We were watching YouTube videos about locals around Taif. And they went to a place where they said they found, some locals had gathered around a boulder on the side of a highway where they had said they had found a portrait of one of Abraha's soldiers. Abraha was the king of Yemen, Hashemite viceroy, what have you, king of Yemen, who, according to Islamic tradition, tried to conquer Mecca. And he marched an army there. And then God destroyed the whole army with a flock of birds that were throwing hot clay at them, heated clay. So it destroyed them and killed him, right? That's the story. And these guys had come to this rock, and there was a seated man, okay? This is great. This is great. There's a seated man on the rock, and like, this is one of Abraha's soldiers, right? Evidence that he comes. Like, it's fantastic. But where is this place? So we see the YouTube video, like, where is this place? So we knew the basic highway where it was. And so we tried to figure it out. So what do? We do the thing that the guy on the internet who says, you send me a picture of you and I can figure out where in the world you are, right?
Yeah.
We were looking at, okay, so water tower, for example, some electrical poles in this kind of way. The curve looks like this. And we went on Google Maps and everything just from the image on YouTube. And we went there. We found it. And this is what we found. Here, I open it up. We found the image here. Now, this is fantastic.
Wow.
And right. So here it is. Now, it's hard to see because middle of the day, but you can see here's the seated man. Here's his foot. Here's his arm. Here's his scepter here. You see it?
Yes.
And this is his head. There's his head. You see his head. He's got this kind of hat on his head. He's seated here. You can't see it very well because of the light, but I think when I do this, you can see what I'm getting to, right?
Yes.
And then here, this is what attracted me to it, because this is a Thamuric D inscription, which says Hafara Awarak. Fine, whatever. This guy called Awarak bin Hama'at. Fine. So this guy here carved. It's a meaningless inscription, but what was so interesting to me, and the reason why I wanted to come visit this, is that in our surveys, we found a couple of other inscriptions by this guy, Awalak. So I thought how cool it would be if we can like reconstruct this route, right?
Wow.
Now, so we went there. But then when we got there, dude, oh man, look at the rock. You see what's there? You see that? Yeah. Paleo-Arabic. Paleo-Arabic.
Yeah.
Our last day, Paleo-Arabic. This was the first, we can be sure about it, Paleo-Arabic inscription from the broader region of Mecca. And it says, Barakkum Rabbuna. May our Lord, using Rabb again, bless you.
So you can't say there's no evidence of them being here in this period with this, using similar linguistics to what you're saying is found in the north with Allah. Or at least You know what I'm saying? This is probably Allah that this guy is talking about, because
I'm going to prove to you it is. I'm going to prove
okay.
All right. Very nice. Isn't that amazing? Right?
Yes,
so
that is.
That's that. So what's so involved with this, and all of this, it doesn't make it into the publications, but there are adventures behind these discoveries.
Yeah, this is amazing.
Right. There are stories, right, and they're tremendous, and they're so wonderful to kind of talk about informally like this. Of course, you don't put them in the publication, but you get the idea. There are stories behind these, and sometimes it's accidental. And I mean, oh God, we can go on and on about accidental discoveries and how amazing they've been.
Right.
Now, Taif. This is the city next door to Mecca, okay? The town next door. Now, 2022, we go back to Taif. We document something we just published. Check this out, man. I took a picture of me standing next to it so you get a scale.
Yeah.
There are two inscriptions. This one up here, this is Paleo-Arabic from Taif. This says, Bismika Rabbana, in your name, our Lord, Ana Handala bin Abd Amru. I am Handala, son of Abd Amru. Ulsi bi birrillah. I urge you to be pious towards Allah, God. So we see Allah and Rabb, that's the same character.
Yeah.
Okay. And it's a monotheistic thing. Again, talking about piety, right, towards God. I mean, these are formulating concepts and all of this, but you do not encounter this in traditional Arabian religion. These were not concepts there. This here is a religious tradition that has been profoundly influenced by the imperial monotheistic ideologies all the way around them. Okay.
Wow.
Now, what's fascinating about this, Haytham Sidki and I published this recently, is that this individual here is likely, and we only deal in likelihoods, but he is likely to be someone who ends up being a companion of Muhammad. But Muhammad changed his name because he has a pagan name, Abd Amru. So he changed it to Abi Amr. But the fact that this guy is using his old name and he's introducing with an invocation that's unknown in the Islamic tradition, Bismika Rabbana, it's likely that this guy carved the inscription before he became a follower of Muhammad.
Hold on. Oh,
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
Isn't that crazy? So this is his let's say this would be an expression of his religious identity before he became a Muslim, but
Got
we
it.
can see how close it already is to Islam.
Yes.
I mean, we're dealing with just, very subtle transformations and phraseology. And then his friend down here says the same thing. Bismika Rabbana, ana Abd al-Uzza, Bar Sufyan, I am Abd al-Uzza, pagan name, he's a worshiper of al-Uzza, the son of Sufyan. I urge you to be pious towards God. Also, very unlikely to be a Muslim, okay?
Right.
With these names. And we can see this because look at this guy, Abd al-Uzza, right? That's his name. He's a pagan name. We can see some pious person came by later and tried to hammer out his pagan name. You see that? Another evidence, this is pre-Islamic, man. Somebody came and tried to hammer it out.
It's fair to speculate that this could be early 600, like
yes,
maybe 610s or 605 or
this guy Hanzala bin Abd Amru, now I don't know, again I come back to it, we don't confuse the part for the whole, because the tradition remembers the names of individuals does not mean associated stories are historical.
Got it.
But if we want to, give the benefit of the doubt and just treat it all historically, fine. According to tradition, this man died in 3 AH, 3 Hijra. So 3 years after the migration of the Prophet Muhammad and his community to Medina during the Battle of Uhud against the Meccans. So he was slain in that battle. So this inscription must predate that. Okay. And then, we're talking early 600s. Yeah. Early 600s. Tremendous. So that's, again, tip of the iceberg. All right. This is a generational project. We're not going to cover it all now. I remember I was once interacting with somebody who, this was before we even did any of this kind of work, when I said something along the lines of, we just don't know yet about what's in the Hijaz. And the person in the audience, who was a scholar, basically told me, but it's been surveyed. We know. And this must have been in 2018, maybe, or something like that. This is something someone says when they've never actually been out in this world. The landscapes are so vast, even in the Harra, right, in Jordan, which is much smaller than the Hijaz. Most of it is still unexplored. Most of it is unexplored. Hijaz, most of it's unexplored. Now, there are trends, and the trends are important. We see a monotheistic trend. As we keep finding things that look the same and the same. So there are trends. We might find a text one day in some mountain, some guy in the 7th century still worshiping Dhul Khalasa or something. I don't know. Doesn't make a difference, but there's certainly a trend here, and that's what matters. But no, it has not been explored. There's going to be, we're going to continue making discoveries for generations, right? There's so much work to do. And so, we're not going to have the definitive work on this now at all, right? And the archaeology and everything. So we are not going to solve Islamic origins and pre-Islamic Arabia in our generation. I'm sorry to say this, everyone who's busy in the field, we are making incremental advancements, but we are not going to have the answers. The answers
are so complicated.
Yeah.
If I were to just throw my little speculation here, right, on why this is such a problem with me just thinking about it, and I'm far from anything in the field. I'm just a student listening to you, right? Is that even with that one inscription alone, trying to act like I'm going to paint the narrative of what's taking place here, it's a huge red flag that they're already monotheists before they become Muslim, which means there's already stuff going on that is monotheistic in this region of a belief in Allah as the single one Lord, the one God that deserves your pious adoration and worship and all.
And forgiveness, that forgiveness is so important.
Right.
Yeah.
That's a huge red flag to me that, how far back does that go is a big question I have. How far back can we say that adoration of the one God, Allah, is in this region? I don't know. And maybe it's this unique, kind of like Jesus, right, comes on the scene. He's a Jew. He's practicing Judaism. Well, people were already practicing Judaism when Jesus comes along, but you get this radical reinterpretation from this guy, Paul. At least it seems that he's being interpreted this way, where he's saying it's not a Jew who's one outwardly, it's inward. And he starts to do something unique with the already existing religion. That seems to be, if I'm using kind of heuristic or an analogous example, Muhammad's doing something to the already existing monotheism in this area under this deity. And of course, stories about the dark pagan times before, Islam. We find that everywhere. Like most of the religions that are kind of breaking away from the standard, whatever might be the thing at the time in that particular region at the particular time, tell stories that indicate this. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. I want to know what people were doing before based on what they've left us. And that's the only way, sorting that out is really the only way of figuring out what comes next. Because see, so much of our historiography and ideas about the transformation that happened with the emergence of Islam are based on images of pre-Islam, that emerged in the Islamic period under, very specific ideological conditions and oftentimes in the context of interfaith, contests. And so let's just figure out what these guys were doing first. Let's figure them out. We've got a lot of work to do, like with these Safavidic. They continue to surprise us all the time. We've got a lot to discover. Let's figure them out. And then we can, then the time for big theories comes later. And that's what I think a lot of, it's frustrating, because I have this book contract that I'm supposed to write the definitive history of Arabic. Okay. And signed this contract in 2019 or 18 or something like that. I mean, I'm not even close to being done with it. I need to do it. But the thing that keeps me back, is that we're not ready. There's too much more to discover. Right. And I don't want to write a book that's going to be 500 pages that is also outdated the minute I publish it. You see what I mean?
Yes.
So every time I go to the field, I come back with something that affects the book and the argumentation. So This is what I'm saying is that people want the big story. People want the big synthesis, but we're at that moment now where we've just unlocked a universe that we need to explore, much less, talk about that universe's origins or anything of that sort. We're still figuring out what's in it. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
There's so much. And it's so different, so radically different than everything we thought we knew. We've got tons to do. So this is the humility I think we need to bring with us when we explore these areas and when we talk about it. I mean, it's incremental. Yes, every single article. So when we write an article, we treat a specific text. I mean, that's the building block. That's the lasting piece of scholarship, because what we're doing is that we're basically trying to restore as well as we can, methodologically informed way as possible, what that text meant in its original context and what its implications are and how it fits into that broader world. And it's step by step, slowly and slowly. You see, every season changes things.
One last question in light of what we discussed and your ongoing work on this.
Yeah.
The big picture that you're saying that we can't paint yet and shouldn't try, is that slowing down the progress of what you're trying to achieve? And then it's a two-pronged question. Sorry, I'm throwing two in there. It really should have been one, but is that slowing it down? What are the problems with that? And then what have we discovered that is overturning what we once thought? Because I don't know the field inside and out, especially pre-Islamic observations. Yeah. What is so radical about what you discovered in a nutshell for the basic person who's sitting down watching this video on YouTube going, what is so unique that overturns what was the standard idea in what he's describing? Yeah,
we do need syntheses, of course, but it's that big. So for me, my own personal opinion at the moment, maybe it'll anger some people, but is that we don't yet have a clear enough picture of pre-Islamic West Arabia or Arabia in general on the eve of Islam. From the data still coming, there's a lot of data, there's a lot to do. We haven't reconstructed that world accurately enough to really configure it with Quranic origins. But that's important because what happens? A lot of the argumentation about things like Quranic origins, especially its geography, is based off of ideas of implausibility. It is implausible that a place like X be the origin of Y. But how do you know what the place like X looks like? You see what I mean? That's what we don't know yet. So that argument based on the plausibility of a certain thing is not going to hold very well. You see what I mean? Mm-hmm. So we don't, that huge picture is not there. But, for example, we can talk about, I did a synthetic study. I think we can do that step by step on what do the Safavidic inscriptions tell us about the religion of these nomads. That's a piece of pre-Islamic Arabia. Right. That's a piece of it. You see what I mean?
Yep.
I gave a talk last week at the Seminar for Arabian Studies in Paris on what do the Hijazi Paleo-Arabic inscriptions tell us about the religious landscape of the Hijaz in terms of transformation that we know so far. And I talked about trends, slowly getting there. the statements like, hey, the Quran couldn't plausibly come from the Hijaz because there were no monotheists there were no Christians there were no, we don't know. Let's take it easy a bit. We don't know really very much at all. We still, just to give an idea, think about how important this area is. The area between Mecca and Medina, which was a high traffic area, okay? That area between Mecca and Medina has not been surveyed. It's not been explored. No idea what's there.
So these assumptions that we hear usually are from like fringe ideas, and I don't mean that derogatorily. I mean like people who are pushing back against the tradition that we typically get told. They come up with like the Petra model, or they come up with all these different origin of Mecca is really Petra, or these kind of things. And they're kind of, I don't want to say pseudo, but I do want to say pseudo because like we get the same trends, for example, in biblical stuff. You get guys who go, well, we have dates and names wrong about biblical characters. The chronology's wrong. So now what we need to do is shift it by 300 years. And then you'll find out Solomon is actually Pharaoh, this Pharaoh. And like they do weird stuff to try and like make it make sense, but in totally different geographies or totally different figures from different regions. Weird stuff. I'm sure you've heard of like Petra model, or like people saying Mecca was Petra.
Yeah. So I think it's a symptom of what people do is they look at in their interpretation of how scholarship is proceeded. But this is certainly true for pre-Islamic Arabian religion, is that people have over-relied on literary sources from the Islamic period and treated them really uncritically. So what the general model of, in their mind, right? The general model of, and this is to caricature, this is not what I think. I'm trying to kind of give an idea of what some of the detractors would say. Is the general model of Western scholarship until recently of Islam has been, we're just going to take the Islamic narrative and we're going to remove the supernatural stuff. And voila, we have history. So, okay. The whole story, Muhammad's whole life that's factual, except for the parts he's talking to angels and God. That's fake. Right. And he's just really writing the whole thing himself. But everything else is good. And their response to that is like, well, you can't take an epic, mythological epic is the way they would view it, and take out what seems to you to be historically implausible and then determine you have history. So it's a pushback against that. Now, I don't think that that's what Western scholars have been doing, but I can see how from a certain point of view, you can, have an uncharitable reading of their work in that way. Okay. Right. The pushback, though, is that it's all wrong. It's all storyland. It's all fairy tales, right? We have the same problem with Arabic poetry, pre-Islamic Arabic poetry. People have taken it at face value. Then you had this kind of rad fa'al, you have a response to it, which is, no, it's all fake. It's all useless, all invisible. Now we're coming back. The field is coming back and saying, no, it's real. So we're going to kill back and forth, whatever. The same idea here. So it's a symptom of that. So Petra, okay, put out the idea. I think the field is settled that it's not plausible, doesn't work out. That's basically, but that's the idea. People put out an idea. The same thing with the Christoph Luxemburg idea that the Quran was originally in Aramaic or whatever. The idea was put out there and it received a lot of attention from the field. Scholars gave it a fair shake and they said it doesn't work out. And that's the way scholarship moves. But the reason why that kind of scholarship exists is because, there didn't develop until really recently a proper source and textual critical approach to this material. Right. Philology has been so bad. People who were looking at this material didn't really have a good comparative methodology. And then, our only way of understanding things is comparativism, right? This is what we're doing. And so if you don't have a good comparativist methodology, you can go off the rails but they're good tests because in my opinion, works like, Quran is written in Aramaic, Petra is the original Mecca. They're good teaching moments because they help us understand why we know what we know, why we think we know what we know. Because when we can say this, we know that this isn't the case. We lay out why. We can better defend why we think we know what we know. You see what I mean?
We're grateful for those existing is the point because it helps us hone in and sharpen our observations to be more accurate about what the data seems to be indicating and still may not have an absolute conclusive thing. So based on everything you presented today, right, we can't rule out that the traditional narrative that something started here in this area is not the case. We have epigraphic, we have inscription, we have archaeology, or at least we will have more, at least as time goes by, if we start to examine these things that might actually help us go, hey, using Christianity as an analogy, did Jesus really walk around in the Galilee synagogues around the Lake Tiberias? Did he actually go down to Jerusalem and get and flip over money changing tables? Well, we can say some of this stuff was there, but can we say he did it? Well, my point is like there's a mix between legend and possible historical verisimilitude, and we don't need to throw the baby out with the bathwater, but we don't need to keep the baby with the bathwater. We need to have external evidence. We need epigraphic archaeological evidence that can maybe help us in understanding what may be going on. And then at some point, we should draw a line and go, hey, okay, we will never know if that even happened. There's just no way to be able to nail that down if this exact thing here that is written occurred. I'm using Jesus for the example because
sure, yeah.
You know what I mean?
Who was it? Was it Bart Ehrman who said there's no historical evidence for the vast majority of history, right? Something along those lines, right? So we'll never be able to know, whether specific details happened. But so like we come back to our man Hanbala here, like we don't know for a fact that he died in the Battle of Uhud. We don't know for a fact, the kind of conversations he was having with the Prophet or whatever. But what we do know is that a man like him could have very plausibly existed in these places. Mm-hmm. The epigraphic evidence shows that a figure like that could have plausibly existed here. It's and that's about as far as you can go. Yeah.
I was going to say, I can imagine people, again, remember when we create a problem that sometimes is harder, it's a worse problem than it is than the original. I could see someone going, no. What happened was someone wrote in Proto-Arabic later to try and put this in this place. You see how far they'll go.
In fact, we can do that, and then we can push it further, and then we're all living in a simulation, right? I mean, of course you can. This is the point. I mean, we all have to assume that we can learn about things, and if we're willing to admit these kind of implausible, everything's possible, of course, but implausible scenarios, then we're not in business of anything. I mean, it's just done. I mean, maybe somebody, we don't know how, went and wrote all the Safavidic inscriptions. And yes, they're weathered and the patina shows that they've been there for centuries and all of that, but maybe they have a technology that can do that. I mean, you can come up with a million excuses. And my point is maybe this is all the simulations, all the matrix, and none of it's real at all, right? And there's no way you can actually demonstrate that that's not the case, right? That's this philosophical problem. Like, no one can demonstrate that we're not in a simulation. But, you're not going to get very far with things if you focus on that possibility. Right. Either you're in a simulation or not, have to assume that the simulation works according to certain rules and that you can discover things about it. And that's what we're going to do about the past. I don't know. I mean, I can make very good scientific arguments as to why it is extremely implausible. I mean, it's completely unlikely. I mean, we're talking about, 0.00001% possibility that anybody had ever faked any of these things. Right? Combination of the patina, the weathering, the knowledge of the orthography, which people didn't have, any of the phraseology, all of this stuff. It's not there. But if you're going to admit that kind of stuff, yes, I mean, Bigfoot could have written these things.
He probably did write them. Yeah, you're right.
Not? Why not? And so we are. But lots to learn, lots to do, and so much fun. So well, I see that we've been here for 2 hours.
Yes,
and time flies.
It does.
So maybe we call it a day and
absolutely
do this again another time, huh?
I really appreciate you, Ahmad Al-Jallad. I hope I pronounced that properly. I do try.
The only pronunciation that I don't admit. So Ahmad is the proper Arabic pronunciation. But I also, I lived in the Netherlands for a long time. They say Ahmad there, Ahmad. That's fine. Even with the Turks, what do they say? Ahmet, that's fine as well. I will not accept the pronunciation Ahmad. Oh my God. That is nails on a chalkboard for me.
Ahmad Al-Jallad.
Ahmad, I can't take it. Oh, I can't take it. So that one, so whatever you say, Ahmad, as long as you have a consonant there after the that's fine with me. And choose your consonant. That's totally fine. But there needs to be a consonant there. Yeah.
You have been fantastic. This is a journey that I can't wait to see in the next decade or two where you go, and those as your colleagues and stuff. Haytham, I always say Haytham. You said Haytham. Haytham. Sidki, he's awesome. We've done one particularly dealing with, I believe it was kind of in the preservation vein. It's been a minute since we recorded on that, but I really love what you do. I hope more people find curiosity, enjoy this, and could see the importance of this and how this might help us understand, again, how to piece this together in the long run to get this big picture. Maybe we get a really good big picture by the end of your life, hopefully, on understanding better. I'd love that.
I mean, we're going to get something at some point. So
Yeah.
Maybe we don't see it, but it's coming. Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. Well, thanks so much.
Thank you.
And good day.
You too. Have a good one. And everyone, drop a comment. Let us know your favorite part. Have a good one.